Good morning, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be back here today. Thank you, Nick, for the continued partnership. What can we do as Vodacom without you? We really value the partnership. And to all the civil society organizations that are here, government, fellow private sector organizations, it's a pleasure to stand here before you to talk about what we do together with you. I just want to start with an experience that we had last year shortly after the establishment of the Government of National Unity, when we went to meet the newly appointed Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. We went there to pay a courtesy visit to introduce ourselves to the newly appointed minister, and we wanted to brag about our triple BEE level 1 status. And we displayed on the screen our contribution to the dimensions of the scorecard. And what the minister picked on was on skills development. And he said to us, he can see that we are contributing millions and billions over the past 20 years. And he said it is not just Vodacom that is making such immense contributions. Most of the corporates that he has engaged with are contributing billions. And he also made an observation that government is also contributing billions in education through informal and formal education, mainly through the SETAs. And he said there are also civil society organizations and donor organizations that are also contributing billions. But then he asked a profound question, which is, if collectively, government, civil society, and the private sector are contributing so much on skills development, why is it that we have a skills deficit in the country? Why is it that we have such high levels of unemployment in this country? And of course, I don't want to talk about the horrific statistics that we saw yesterday. It is quite saddening. And we looked at each other. Yes, there are many contributing factors to the questions that he asked, but something just crossed my mind, and I said to the minister, one of the contributing factors is that we don't do impact measurement. And impact measurement is not about writing annual reports and we submit them to an oversight structure, and that oversight structure collates everybody's information and they produce a mega report. It's bigger than that. So my point of departure is that traditionally, monitoring and evaluation and learning are not the purview of corporates. They are usually within the remit of big civil society organizations like your Oxfam, UN organizations, your Red Cross. I do not know about those organizations that have pulled funding, if they were also doing monitoring and evaluation. What corporates used to do traditionally was to write big checks. We wrote big checks and we walked away. And it was for government to take the money that we contribute and they would distribute it to civil society to execute. And civil society will take the money, they will execute, and they will do auditing or they will do monitoring and evaluation. Investors, equally, were not focusing so much on societal upliftment. They were focusing more on profits and big dividends. And as a result, corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment was actually paying lip service. You write your check and you walk away and you go to the next project. But fast forward to today. Investors today and employees, the Gen Z and the millennials, they don't want to invest or to be associated with corporates that do not contribute to environmental programs or environmental sustainability. They don't want to be associated with corporates that do not contribute to societal upliftment. They want to be associated with corporates or organizations that uphold the highest standards of ethics, integrity, and governance. And what is the best way of giving that shareholder return than to conduct impact measurement through monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And it reminds me of my time when I joined Vodacom about 9 years ago. I'm the chairperson of the Vodacom Foundation. The Vodacom Foundation today manages a budget of 120 million rands per annum. That is a huge budget. But when I joined, the board members were not happy because we were running too many projects. And they said, we are putting too much money into this foundation, but we do not see where the investments are going. So you need to do something. What did we do? Thank you, Nick. We partnered with Trialogue, and we had to step back and conduct introspection. And we had to revise our strategy. And we adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, streamlined our activities into education, gender empowerment, and infrastructure, which is ICTs, which is what Vodacom is all about. But in order to give that meaningful shareholder return, we had to establish a monitoring, evaluation, and learning department, a new thing in the corporate world. Then we started applying the principles, but we realized that it is difficult to apply the principles of monitoring, evaluation, and learning when the projects are already running and they are embedded and almost maturing. It is difficult to implement your theory of change when the projects are already running. So it means you have to work backwards, which is not easy. So whilst we are doing monitoring and evaluation, I wouldn't say, Nick, that our monitoring, evaluation, and learning is perfect. It is a journey that we are walking. But we are at a stage now where we have gained the trust of all our stakeholders. They are able to respond to our surveys when we issue them. They are able to give us objective feedback. And we are able to come up with recommendations and make objective findings. And we are able to solicit solutions, not only within Vodacom, but also from our stakeholder community. Now, I want to share something again. And some of you will ask yourselves, how is this relevant for the topic today? The 100 billion rands transformation fund, which is at the lips of most people. It has been met with mixed reactions. Why am I talking about it? I am talking about it because I want to demonstrate that monitoring and evaluation is not just a CSR or CSI phenomenon. It should be applied in everything that corporates do and in everything that governments do. As Vodacom, we support supply and enterprise development. We want to put it on record, we are not opposed to the fund. However, there are some issues that we have put on the table to say governance has to be at the top of the agenda. Integrity and ethics should be at the top of the agenda in the administration of the fund. But there also has to be impact measurement. There has to be monitoring and evaluation. And we cannot wait for the fund to be set up and the programs to run before we come up with monitoring and evaluation principles. Monitoring and evaluation has to be embedded now at the conceptualization of the fund. Because if we do not do that, to understand the problem statement, what is the fund going to solve for? What are the inputs? And who are those inputs going to be coming from? What are the outputs? What are the outcomes? And also, if we do not appreciate that results are a long-term game, then there is going to be frustration. Now, as I conclude, when I drove here, because of avoiding traffic on the N1, I live in Pretoria, we drove through Alexander. And it was horrific, driving past the informal settlements. And on the horizon, I could see the Sandton Towers. And I said to myself, that inequality is not sustainable. And only monitoring and evaluation and impact measurement can assist us to make sure that we deal with inequality in our country. Thank you.
Just on the second chair, please. Thank you. Taki, it's almost as if you were in the room yesterday, right? So, Sisbusi Mavuso was at this podium that you've just left. And one of the statements that she made, and I'm going to try and remember it as verbatim as possible, she said, "It is no longer sustainable that the people from Alexandra can look at the skyline of Sandton through the windows of their shacks." And you have brought that image straight back into the room. And, you know, I remember when this contrast first started being made, it made for nice presentations and for nice conversation starters. But I think the pressure of changing this duality of our society can no longer be ignored. And thank you for bringing that back into the room. And as we take now this conversation a little bit broader by inviting two more voices to really help us think about how do we lead with the mindset that says we have to focus on our outcomes, we have to monitor, we have to evaluate, and we have to be committed and disciplined to learning in the process. I'm going to invite Dr. Kotschy to join us. Dr. Kotschy is an MEL consultant and researcher and has been an independent monitoring, evaluation, and learning practitioner for the last 10 years. Her work focuses on promoting learning and adaptation in complex environment programs at a range of scales from local to global. Is Dr. Oh, there she is. Let's give her a big round of applause as she comes in. Thank you very much. Please take your seat. Thank you. And to close off the panel, I'm going to invite Mr. Gcobani Zonke from Ubuntu Pathways. He's the Deputy President of Ubuntu Pathways. And this is a non-profit organization that is based in Gcobani. He has over 2 decades of experience in community development and education. Might we please give Mr. Zonke a round of applause, please? So, before we kick off into the conversation, allow me just to then call for our poll that's going to help us locate everybody into the conversation. So the technical team, if I can ask us to run the poll. And there it is. The question is already up. What is the biggest barrier to embedding a culture of MEL in your organization or sector? Is there just a lack of leadership buy-in in terms of the significance and importance of MEL? Do we lack the skills or the capacity? Is MEL just seen as compliance rather than learning? Is there inadequate funding or resources to actually do the MEL piece? Are we too siloed or fragmented, especially as we think about the data systems to help us understand the data that informs the MEL? Is there resistance to change in the organizational culture or as reflected in the culture? And then finally, no, there's no barrier. We have a culture of MEL. Which of these statements applies to you? And if you're on stage, you can either peer down or you can do like the weather ladies and gentlemen and look behind you. But what we do have and what we are seeing are 2 standouts. The first at 31% saying the part of the challenge is that MEL is seen as compliance rather than real or true learning. And the second standout is there's no capacity. There seems to be limited skills to carry through MEL. And I always just like to always look at the lowest one as well. And at 1%, there's just a lack of buy-in. And from a leadership perspective. So lack of leadership buy-in at 1%. So I'm going to ask you to keep these results at the back of your mind, and if you want to reference them as we go through our conversation, you're more than welcome to do that. And Taki, maybe let me just kick off with you once again. We know that Vodacom has been recognized as a leader in CSI. You've been voted first by companies in Trilog's annual research for in the last 8 years. But I want to focus particularly on how you've embedded MEL into your programs, and in particular how it's helped you shift from reporting on outputs to really reporting on measurable outcomes.
Thank you so much. I would like to start by thanking all the corporates that have recognized the work that we are doing in the corporate social responsibility space. As I said earlier, we do not do what we do alone. We do what we do as Vodacom, whether it's commercial or it's CSR. We do it in support of government programs, and we work with government, we work with civil society organizations, and of course we work with other corporates.
Yes.
So the recognition serves as inspiration for us to do more with all of you. Now, as we walk our purpose journey as Vodacom, we had to learn to eschew the numbers game. Where when we are connecting schools, the focus will be how many schools have we connected. And of course, in our earlier integrated reports, we'll be bragging about we have connected 3,000 schools. And then the number will change because some schools will be closed, some will be merged, and then it becomes we've connected 2,500 schools. But what were we doing? We were actually delivering a SIM and a router. And we were working our way to the next project. We had to stop focusing on how many ECDs are we refurbishing, how many pit latrines are we demolishing. Where we are doing psychosocial support, we had to stop bragging about how many psychologists and social workers are we deploying. The focus then had to move to where we are deploying psychosocial support. What is the impact? How is that psychosocial support impacting the well-being of the learners, the teachers, and the communities, including the parents? Where we are deploying technologies in the school, our focus started being how are we embedding digital literacy, not just for the learners, but also for the parents. And where we have a youth academy, our focus stopped being how many graduates are we producing, because as we saw from the statistics from Stats SA yesterday, graduates are leaving school, but they are not getting jobs. So we then had to be creative and say, if they're not getting jobs, what should we do? We started taking them and putting them in some of our schools and some of our NPOs so that they should begin to add value. But that does not start in a vacuum. You need to have a baseline where you start from, and you need to aspire to a higher position. And working with Nick, we adopted the CSI metrics and looked at the 4 quadrants to say there is the charitable CSI quadrant, there is the developmental CSI quadrant, and there is the strategic CSI quadrant. Where are we? When we started, we were actually at the bottom, at the charitable donations quadrant, because even though we're not just writing checks to NPOs, but we're connecting schools, as I said, it's a router and a SIM, and you walk away. And then what you put in that school develops legs, and nobody knows where it is. And therefore, we had to say, if we want to aspire to the developmental quadrant and also to the strategic quadrant, we have to put milestones in place. And that was when we started implementing monitoring and evaluation. And I can say with confidence today, and of course it's a journey, we have now started moving from the charitable donations quadrant, and most of our projects are sitting at the top, at the developmental and also the strategic quadrant. Thank you.
What I'm hearing you say, Take, and it's to borrow your exact words, is it's a journey.
Yes.
But it's a journey that starts off with being courageous enough to ask different questions.
Yes.
And one can also appreciate the struggle, because the ease of reporting on just numbers and just on output is much, it's a lot easier than to report on outcomes. And so as you talk about these new questions, what I want to do is maybe bring one of these questions to Gcobani and get a sense of, at Ubuntu Pathways, which is fairly well known for its holistic sort of cradle to grave approach to the way you run your programs, how has monitoring, evaluation, and learning really helped you to adapt or to grow your programs? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you integrate MEL in your work.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nozipo, for the question. Ubuntu is 25 years old.
Yes.
And being 25 years old, monitoring, evaluation, and learning has been the backbone of the organization. From day one when we started, we actually hang our hopes on the monitoring and evaluation. To just give an example, When we started the organization, we went to the community to check as to do a buy-in. And every program that we have in the organization is actually designed in the minds of the people. Whatever information they've given us, the information that we've taken, it has given an idea what they want. Having said that, over the 25 years, we've been building a monitoring evaluation because as Taki has actually indicated, it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's a journey. We may not at that point in time knew the terminology and all that, but what we're doing, we're always collecting information, and that information we were using to actually inform our strategy moving forward as an organization. At the same time, the collection of that information, it actually helps us to tell us if we're making progression, if we're progressing, and then if we're not progressing, then we had to adapt. And we look at the real-time issues, the data was real-time. So it has helped us to adapt.
I absolutely love that. So you've used the data that's come out of MEL to really inform your strategy, so it informs why you do what you do and how you do it, but also to adapt to the changes as they emerge in the environment. I had a picture in my mind as you were speaking, which I thought was maybe worth sharing, is the idea of always making sure that the ladder that you're climbing is actually leaning against the right wall. Because we can do a really good job of climbing ladders really quickly, but they're leaning on the wrong wall. And I'm bringing that in because I think making sure that the ladder's on the right wall starts with what Taki was talking about, which is, what are we measuring? Are we measuring the right metrics? What is it that we're putting front and center, and what are we holding ourselves accountable to? And it sounds like at Ubuntu that is something that is very much a part of how you do your work. So, Corin, let me bring your voice into this conversation. As an academic, as well as an MEL practitioner, what are the key ingredients that we spoke about Potjie courses yesterday, we're going to bring them back into the room. What are the ingredients that need to be in the Potjie pot for us to build a culture of learning and not just measuring, so that we really tap into the L of MEL?
Thanks very much. And I think maybe let me start by saying that my experience in this comes from an NGO context, in an NGO called Award, which is the Association for Water and Rural Development, which actually was funded by USAID, speaking of USAID, which actually provided us with a space, quite a long and significant space, to think about monitoring and evaluation and how we could repurpose it towards learning rather than just measuring and reporting. And so that learning that came out of that space, I've kind of subsequently taken into all sorts of other spheres, but that's where it originated. So I think in terms of ingredients, what I thought was one of them is support from the leadership. Now I see from our poll that is a very an ingredient that seems to be there according to the survey, that there is buy-in from leadership. But I think as a starting point, that's absolutely essential, because the kind of thing that we need to do to build learning in an organization has to involve the leadership, and it has to not only support sort of philosophically, but there needs to be recognition for learning, there needs to be time and space made for it. And so that support is really important. The second thing, I think, talks to the second 2 points there, about the MEL capacity and the compliance rather than learning. I think that MEL staff and MEL teams in organizations need to see themselves as way more than technical people. And they need to not be treated as technical people doing their thing separately on the side. They need to actually take on an advocacy role. And I guess it's covered in a paper that I wrote together with a colleague, Eureka Rosenberg at Rhodes University, talking about the skills needed for a new approach to M&E. And that talks about not just technical skills, but relational skills and transformational skills. And some of those are, being able to convince people of the value of reflecting on data that has been collected and the value of using it and actually engaging with it, so that it's not just something that happens separately from your daily work, but becomes embedded in it. And to get there needs a lot of advocacy and ongoing support and chipping away at the same thing, the same message all the time. So that's a kind of role that I think M&E people should be playing. Then I suppose as part of that, the MEL staff need to be, at least some of them, need to be of sufficient seniority, I suppose, for want of a better word, to be able to interface with leadership at whatever level. Because if you only have a junior intern person working on your data, it's going to be very difficult to have that person then sitting in management meetings, and it just practically doesn't work. So having at least some of the team who are able to interface with leadership is important. To connect the MEL to strategy and management practically, so to actually meet together as teams, to interface and talk to each other regularly is really important. And the last thing I think is just to involve as many people as possible, not only MEL people in the team. It shouldn't be seen as a MEL team function. It should be seen as an organization-wide function.
So almost like mainstreaming learning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning in particular within just the everyday culture of the organization. And what I'm hearing you say is that in addition to that, it's the leadership buy-in, it's the advocacy, and that it's not a technical capability only, and I think that's really important. It's the right skills, but it's also the seniority that you've raised, because I think that's quite important. How we hire for MEL says a lot about how we value MEL in the broader capability that we're bringing within an organization. Now, before I get to the audience, I probably want to just bring one or two more questions back. Taki, one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about yesterday is the relationship, the collaboration with government and business and civil society all coming together. How does MEL, or how has Vodacom integrated MEL in its partnerships with government and civil society? And I'm keen to hear what those conversations sound like. Are they easy conversations for you? Or can they be challenging? Because I think it would be really good to get a sobering sense of how do we integrate, but how do we do it well?
Yeah, I think it's a mindset issue, and for each party to know their space.
Sure.
That's very important. And I've got my own slogan, which my team knows, which is that government is there to make policy. And in making policies, they must create a conducive environment for business and civil society to thrive. Our role as the private sector is to give inputs and to give resources to ensure that we implement within that set frameworks. It should not be an us and them.
Yes.
And then civil society serves as the eyes and ears. They hold both government and private sector accountable for the promises that we make. Once you understand these principles, it is easy to work. So as Vodacom, once we decided that we were going to adopt the NDP principles, the National Development Plan principles, and streamlining the activities of the foundation along the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals, and dropped many of the programs that we were running and remained with education and gender equality and using ICT as the thread that cuts across, and then partnerships. We then stepped back and said, how do we make what we have to work? We started creating ecosystems.
Okay.
So in the education space, you've got verticals. You can have bursaries, you can do connectivity in schools, you can provide content, you can have IT technicians, or you can have psychosocial support. But if you don't bring this together and have a comprehensive approach to education, it does not work. But it costs money to have a comprehensive approach to education. So what we did, we sat down with government and we said, we have this idea of a comprehensive approach to education. Do you have a policy?
Yeah.
And guess what? Government does have a policy on the comprehensive approach to education. What we see in quintile 4 and 5 schools, and what we see in the private sector, government has got a policy for that to also be implemented in quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools.
Yeah.
Why it is not being implemented, that is a story for another day. But because the policy is there, we then decided as Vodacom to say, we will then utilize that policy to create an education ecosystem within the 2,500 schools that we have created using the Dinaledi schools model of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now we have these schools of excellence that are anchored around these verticals, where the focus is not just on the learner, but it is also on the teachers, it is on infrastructure. And then from the graduates from our youth academy, we take them to the schools and they serve as ICT technicians so that they should be able to troubleshoot. Because if you don't troubleshoot, I said earlier, these things develop lags. And if they don't get serviced, then they do not work and they end up as white elephants. But then also because of the high prevalence of gender-based violence and bullying in the schools, we looked at our gender-based violence program, where we also had verticals. We had prevention, we had support, and we had response. We then brought those together and we said, how do we integrate our gender-based violence program with education?
Okay.
We spoke to the Department of Basic Education and they said, you know what, instead of bringing dentists or bringing other designations, why don't you bring psychosocial support in the schools? And they choose the schools for us, by the way. We don't choose our own schools because we move from the premise that we are not experts in pedagogy. We are experts in technology. We are there to use technology as an enabler. And because we move from that premise, then they allow us to scale our programs.
Sure.
Then we introduced gender-based violence in the schools through psychosocial support. And then we started conducting monitoring and evaluation. It's so interesting. Where we have just put a router and a SIM and we walked away, the usage of the technology is very low. In fact, in some of the schools, as soon as you leave, the principal takes the technology and puts it in the storeroom because nobody knows how to use it, or they're afraid that it's going to get stolen. In the schools where we have deployed ICT technicians who are graduates from our own academy, whom we have given jobs to, you find that the usage is high. In the schools where we have deployed psychosocial support, we are finding that there is now improvement in educational outcomes, although we say our partnership with government is not to improve to that.
Yes.
But the feedback that we're getting from our monitoring and evaluation from the principals, from the psychosocial support experts themselves, from the teachers, is that the teachers are now able to focus on pedagogy when the social workers and the psychologists are focusing on social ills. But we're also finding that reporting on gender-based violence, including domestic violence, is also increasing because the presence of psychosocial support in the school is creating a safe space for learners to be able to talk about their challenges.
So there's essentially two massive things that I'm hearing you say. What MELC does is that it gives us role clarity that makes the foundation for ecosystems that work. To be in place, when everybody knows what they're responsible for and what they can be held accountable to, it's easy to measure and then to learn from the respective contributions. So it's about role clarity. It is a key ingredient for ecosystems that work and helping us make impact. I think that's, and I want to thank you for bringing a very practical example on the back of that because it really allows us to come alive. Gcobani, let me build back to you. One of the things you started off with when I asked you how are you using MEL to grow and adapt your programs, you started by making the comment that you go into the community to get buy-in. And I want to go back to that community and ask you, how do you ensure that those voices are not just data sources, but they become agents of learning and agents of co-creation? And can you give me an example, perhaps, if you have one, of where this has been done?
Okay, thank you so much. I guess I should start by saying that our indicators are defined by our professionals. Working directly with the families.
Yes.
That relates to the teachers, that relates to the nurses, that relates to the counselors. Everybody was actually a professional in the organization. Also the ECD teachers. They observe what really matters and shape our metrics from the information that we get from them. That also helps us to interpret the data.
Sure.
Yeah, by working with the community and actually bring it forward to us. And secondly, what we do to make sure that the voice of the community is actually being heard, we conduct the caregiver satisfactory survey.
Okay.
And then from that, whatever information or feedback we get, we integrate or loop it back into the programming of the programs.
Yeah.
That's how we bring them in. Our ECD teachers, they don't just collect information about developmental data. They go beyond that, and they co-design the social emotional indicators to look at the assessment of the safety, the attachment, and the well-being. Because if you teach and you leave those out, there's absolutely no teaching would actually take place.
Yeah.
So that is also very important, and it's also important to be tracked. And also our school teachers, they are not just looking at the reading and the acquisition of mathematics or the numeracy. What they also do, they also engage our students in terms of socially and emotionally. Where do they stand in terms of emotional and socially? So that is based on the social emotional learning of the students. So, in essence, the community, our professionals, and everybody else, they co-design
Sure.
the indicators, and also we work on the realities and reflect on what they actually bring forward to the organization.
Gcobani, thank you so much. I think what you've made come alive for us is that we keep, I think Nicolette actually even alluded to this when she was on stage earlier on. We have a tendency of using language carelessly sometimes without really interrogating what we mean. We're talking about centering communities and making sure that marginalized voices are included and at the center. And what you're showing to us in a very practical way is how. So how do we ensure that we center communities is by making sure that they have a voice in the co-designing of the interventions that are then rolled out. And I think it's a very powerful contribution that you've just made, and allows us to have line of sight of what centering a marginalized voice might actually look like. I want to just bring to Karen a final question, and then I'll go to the audience. Karen, if we think about large organizations, and I think in pictures, and I often think of a dinosaur with a very big tail trying to turn around, and how slow that might be and how much distraction can happen in the process. But when we think about large organizations who potentially think about MEL as a purely technical function, how do we move that animal to change the leadership mindset so that the way you and this entire panel have spoken about MEL is embedded as something that is bigger than technical, that is core to the strategy, that allows us to learn, to improve, and to scale our impact?
That's a difficult one. But I think maybe the starting point is just to ask a question, which is, what is the purpose of MEL or M&E in the organization?
Sure.
Who is it for? Is it for outside people like the public or investors, shareholders, or whatever? Or is it there for the organization itself to become more effective? And there's a definition of learning that I really love, which is that that it's about improving, continuously improving the efficacy of action.
Sure.
And I think that comes from Jim Woodhill, but I really love that definition because it's not just about sort of vague, nebulous concepts that you might learn or sort of traditional academic learning. It's about practically doing better at what you do, step by step. So I guess asking that question of what the MEL is for is the starting point to then thinking about some of those other issues like who do we need to hire in order to make this happen? How do we need to measure so that it promotes learning? Or how do we take what we have measured and bring it into forums where we can actually look at that data and think about what it means and how we could perhaps change or do better. And then maybe one other thing is just the role of business schools in promoting MEL as part of leadership, because I think it is very inherently connected to all the things like adapting or being adaptive, being flexible, being able to transform something, that kind of transformative potential of leadership. And it's very much connected to MEL, but I'm not sure that it's represented well enough as that in leadership training.
Yeah, that's such a brilliant call out, because again, our business schools and the curricula that they put together is a reflection of what we believe we need in leadership, because that's where our brightest go, to go learn how to become leaders. And to the extent that we're not elevating MEL, that says a lot about where we place MEL on the leadership scale. So what I want to do is I want to go to the audience. I've got my phone buzzing here with a couple of questions that are coming through. I also really liked your definition of learning. I'm going to try it out when I'm trying to sound smart one of these days. I'm going to talk about improving my efficacy of action. That's it, improving my efficacy of action, the definition of learning. So there are a couple of comments and questions that have come through. And maybe, Taki, I want to bring this one to you. This one comes from Jacques. Jacques, thank you so much for your engagement. Your questions have been excellent. And Jacques is saying, how do we make sure that the stats provided to the sponsor are actually verified and factual? And I think the unasked question here is that when there is pressure to deliver data without the capacity to collect that data and to, interpret that data, you give what you have. And that, in essence, probably then is the beginning of a really poor relationship in any essence. How do we support those we expect data from to actually do the work of collecting that data, and that we can verify that that data is actually factual?
Thank you so much. It starts with ethics, because ethics and integrity ensure that everything that you have to do has to be above board, but it is easier said than done.
Yeah.
And then there is the issue of ensuring that when you collect data, you store it properly.
Yeah.
There has to be proper archives, and then there has to be accountability. So when we compile our integrated report, or our sustainability report, now called the ESG report,
Yes.
we used to experience challenges, exactly to the question that is asked, about the integrity of the data. Because when you are rushing, information just moves. Everybody has got their KPIs. Information moves, and the senior people do not verify that data. Now, if that data is given to me, when I am not part of that business unit, I have no way of verifying that what I am given is accurate. I take it that it has been signed off. And we bent our fingers. And then we started ensuring a culture of accountability in each business unit. To say, yes, there is the chief, and then there are subject matter experts who are the owners of that data. They're the ones who receive the requests, they collect the data, but the chief or the lead person must be able to sign off that information. Not just through an email, they must also have a signature and a statement that say, I verify and I confirm that the information that I'm passing over is accurate. And from there, then we use that information. Then there is the auditing. You have to bring the auditors to check that data before you publish your report.
Sure.
Because errors happen. A 5.6 can be a 6.5.
Ish.
And that can mean a lot in statistics.
Yeah.
And also, if one person is writing the report, we will say that information gets into your eyes. And sometimes you cannot see things. And therefore, you need more eyes to look at that. And once you have a multidisciplinary approach, then it is much better and it is much easier, and you have that assurance that what you take into the public domain and to your stakeholders is accurate.
So as you talk about ethics, I'm going back to Karen's comment about what business schools will put forward. And ethics and ethical leadership has been a massive focus for the last, decade or even more. And it would be interesting to see how MEL is integrated in in how you show up as an ethical leader, because as you say, you cannot sign off that which you cannot verify. And I think it's such a powerful statement that I think it's something that should probably be constantly ringing in every leader's head to say, can I really verify that which I'm signing off now? And that being a very practical practice of ethical leadership. Let me then bring this question to you, Karen. This one is from Beverly, and Beverly says, how would you suggest small NGOs implement MEL processes when the cost of these studies are so high? So, are there systems that we could put in place to bridge this gap between the cost of MEL and funding? And so in essence, liking the idea that perhaps MEL might be elevated and not necessarily just at business schools. I'm thinking in any other course or made accessible, but not everybody has access to those learning opportunities. How do NGOs then navigate that space and get the requisite skills in your view, Karen?
Yeah, again, it's not an easy answer, but I think that maybe we put so much emphasis sometimes on measurement that we spend all our time and resources and effort on that. And even if you look at MEL plans of organizations, they're often very heavy on the monitoring and the table and the indicators and whatever, and very light on how they're going to use the data in evaluation and learning, because there's not practical planning for that. There isn't space made for it. It's just kind of assumed that it will happen somehow organically. So I think what I would say is, in a small organization where you don't have a lot of resources, focus on the learning part first and do just a limited amount of measurement. Okay, you have to do something, but do a limited amount of measurement and build in to your processes, to everything that you do, a learning element.
Yeah.
It's not actually difficult to do that. It's not costly. It may just need somebody to facilitate that, and that is something that you would have to ensure is there. But you can build in learning processes into every meeting, almost.
Yeah.
You can train or practice the art of reflection with people quite easily, and it's a natural thing that people do and people actually enjoy. So I think if you start there and then kind of build up the measurement and the more formal part, it's perhaps a way to do it.
Fantastic. It sounds like we need a workshop, Kathy, on how we can embed the practice of learning, because as you say, it's not just about getting into the business schools, but there are everyday practices that we can bring into the space. I want to bring one question to Gcobani, and I'm going to close it off with you, Taki. There's one more question before our time is up. Gcobani, there's a question from Bashni. Bashni is saying we need to shift our thinking to focus on learning and even learning from failures. So it's not a question, it's a statement. I want to turn it into a question, because one of the things you said, which I really found really incredible was how you're using Mel to help you adapt. And one would imagine that when you're adapting, you're pivoting, you're moving because the feedback is telling you that either you're not making the desired progress or you could be failing in that particular space. And so the question to you is, how has monitoring, evaluation, and learning helped the organization to learn from some of the failures, big or small, that it might have had along the way? And do you have a practical example you can share with us?
Yeah. We had a term in the organization that you move and then you stop. Literally draw a bus and then you show a stop.
Stop sign.
A stop sign. In other words, what we do then, whatever we do, there's a time that we have to stop and evaluate what we have done.
Yeah.
And then it determines, once we get to that stop, do you turn left or you turn right?
Or you continue.
Or you continue.
Yeah.
So obviously, if what you're doing is in line with what you want to achieve, or the indicators are meaningful, then you continue. But if not, then you have to go back and see where did you go wrong, what needs to be done.
And again, it's such a succinct and concise response, but says a lot about a culture where learning from failure is just integrated in the day-to-day ways of working. So it's not this big, massive point of, you know, where we've had this massive failure, but every single day, how do we have a practice and a culture of pausing and reflecting and say, do we stop, start, or continue from where we are? So maybe, yes.
I just want to say, you know, I believe there's absolutely no failure. But it's an opportunity to review what you have actually done.
Yeah.
And it's a lesson learned.
Yes.
It's an opportunity to learn something.
You remind me of the work of, his name is skipping me now, but he's written a book called The Struggle is the Way. And it's exactly that framing to say that in every struggle lies the lesson and the opportunity to learn. Final question from Teresa. I want to bring this to you, Taki, to close us off. And I think it's such an excellent question. Teresa says, how do funders perceive MEL results if they are not what they expected? Do they see this as a failure or a learning from the outcome to improve? I think we know the answer, that it's a learning, but I think the first part of the question is important. That is how big organizations like yourself, when the results come in and they point to an outcome that is less than what is expected or desirable, what is that immediate reaction like? What do you signal back to the partners when the results are not right? And how do you encourage more of those not nice results to come in so that you can really get the learning? Because I can imagine if you're sitting with the purse, that the desire is to tell you what you want to see and feedback what you want to see.
As a high-performance organization, the first instinct when you don't get the results that you desired, you feel like you have failed.
Yes.
But one thing that monitoring and evaluation has done for us is to be able to accept that things will not always go according to plan. And I like what is said there to say it is not failure. There will always be weaknesses. And where there are weaknesses, you must actually see that as an opportunity to make sure that you do the right thing. And then also engaging with the partners. So what we have begun to do in our monitoring and evaluation is, as we identify weaknesses and strengths, we say, where do those weaknesses lie? Do they lie within Vodacom, or are they with the partners? The challenge arises when the weaknesses lie with the partners. Like, for instance, where we have a youth academy, and then we produce graduates. Yes. Those graduates expect us to also find them employment. But it is not our responsibility to find them employment. And therefore, we need to go to government and say, can you please create a sustainable environment for the economy to grow so that these graduates will be able to find jobs? But then it doesn't end there. We also ask ourselves to say, as a partner to government, what can we do to alleviate that burden? And that is the reason why we have taken some of these graduates and we have put them in our partner organizations. Some we have put them in the schools, some we have put them in the NPOs that we work with. But there's also another dimension which is very important, and you used the word funder.
Yes.
We need to eschew the funder and donor recipient mentality, because it actually perpetuates power, unhealthy power
Yes, asymmetries.
relations.
Yes.
We conducted a study during COVID where we were looking at the relationship between Western funders and African CSOs. And one of the findings was that there is a colonial mentality, and we debated this before we published the report to see if colonial mentality will be the right word. And at the end of the day, because the study was conducted by academics, we said we can't change that word. It was not done by Vodacom. It is what it is. But another finding was that the donor recipients should also learn to be independent. Don't always look to the West to get funding. You should also be self-sustaining. So what is the lesson that we are learning from USAID and PEPFAR? Stoppage. The lesson is governments should learn to be self-sustaining.
Yeah.
We cannot say this part of the world has stopped funding and therefore we're going to another part of the world, because there is no free lunch. We
Sure.
need to learn to be self-sustaining. So what we have done as a way of removing unhealthy power relations as Vodacom, we looked at the NPOs that we were supporting for over 20 years, where we used to just write a check and walked away. We did monitoring and evaluation, and it indicated that we're actually not benefiting them because they cannot even access funding from government. And then the recommendation was that we should actually deal with them as a symbiotic partner. And what did that mean? It meant that we used our resources to digitize their operations. So where Mama Miriam in the Orlando Children's Home had a book where she wrote the details of her beneficiaries for 20 years, we then made sure that that information is digitized. Where we had a feeding scheme in Soweto, where children would leave school with one meal, come and eat and go home, we set up a computer lab. And the kids, after eating, then they sit and then they do their homework. And we find that once you do that, it becomes a respectable relationship.
Sure. I love that on the power dynamics, and we hadn't had an opportunity to speak about that until now, but again, a very practical insight as to how do you restore some of those indignities that come through because of the asymmetries in power. The author of that book is called Ryan Holiday, and the book is called The Obstacle is the Way, and I think it really captures the conversation that we've just had. Can you please give my panelists a big round of applause? Thank you so very much.